Hello everybody, it's Kevin here again, and this week we're going to cover some really big stuff. And I've said that a few times already, but this is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where the API stuff comes into play. This is where we start using the APIs within our mobile applications, and this is where the debugging really starts to get fun. So if we look back to our API that we have here, I did add one route. I haven't pushed the changes to GitHub. They will be pushed by the time that you're seeing this video. But if you see here, we have this get route API version, and ignore that, not production code. That was more of a testing type route, but this one here is the one that we want to use for testing. And what that does is it returns the API version. So this is kind of the entry into the API from the client side here. So you're going to see some terminology. You're going to see client, and that just means the caller, essentially, what's making the call to the server side. And you're going to see the repository, which is just a repository of API calls. So why don't we get into this right away? We have all of these calls that we want to make. We have all these routes set up, right? So we have the routes, and then we have what we can call the route prefix, which would be auth. In this case, it'd be authentication, just auth, and we can verify that just by looking here, auth, login. So to start, like I mentioned, documentation is huge. In this case, I will provide all the documentation manually, just verbally. So we have our API route here, the login route, and this login route expects a username, and it expects a password, and it's going to return some of this here stuff. And we have to prepare the response from the client side, from the app, to be able to get this stuff back. So if we look here, what we can do is we can send the request, and we'll see, you know, what gets returned there. If we go and do, let's see here, I'll just open up a new command prompt. Curl, whoops. Running on port 1250. This should be right. Let me make sure that that's what I have set up here. API version, so not get API version. Go back to our command prompt. And there's our API version. So to start, we want to make this call right away, and this is going to be the easiest call that we can make. It's just a GET request. We don't have to pass anything in, and we're just going to expect a string back. So it's pretty straightforward. But to get to that point, it's a little complicated on the app. So just to start off, why don't we go ahead and create a new application here. So I'll minimize that, move this over here, and let's just go ahead and create a new one here. Go to terminal. Perfect. I'm going to check my recorder here just to have that window ready to go in case I need it. Keep an eye on the time as well. So we'll go into API integration, and we can open this with code. And like I usually, what I usually do in the videos, of course, is I demonstrate. So if we pass in junk data, so nothing here, we get a login failure. If we go back to this, we are debugging. If I set a breakpoint there, we can tell that we hit the request there, or that we hit this area. Notice as well that we set a loading item deal, basically for the user to know that they're waiting on the server. Continue on to that. That'll go back and login failure. And if we do admin Dogecoin, which is what I have set up in the database. Yep. So there we go. If we send that request, we'll get the token and some other stuff as well. So I'll We'll set this off to the side here. We'll go into the lib directory here. Get rid of all of this here stuff. This will probably be a long one, just because we're going to cover a lot of stuff here. I'll get rid of all that and be right back. Now that that's all gone, I'm going to just create a text widget here. And I will start debugging. And I'll pause until that's ready to go. So now that we have the app created here and we are running, right away we need a new structure that we haven't used to make HTTP requests. And the structure that we'll be using, the class or library, whatever you want to refer to it as, is DO right here. And I'll provide the link as well so that you all can look at the documentation. But this essentially is what we'll use to make API calls. This is what this here is the bread and butter, essentially, just for making API calls from the client side in Flutter. I'm sure that there's other methods of doing it. This is the method that I chose. It's easy, it's straightforward, and it's clean. So what we need to do though right away is we need to get it installed. You can see how to do that here, and you can do it this way where you do the Dart pub add. What I like to do though, because I want to use version 4.1.0, is I'll add it manually, and I'll show you all how to do that here. So what we can do is we can go to our pubspec.yaml, and it's really important to get the indenting here correctly. So it's kind of like Python, where if you don't have the indenting correct, it's not going to work right. It's going to fail. So it's the exact same deal here. So what you can do is you can go to the Cupertino icons area. This will be in line with where we want to add that package. Just create a new line here and set DO, and then do the upward caret 4.0.1. We could install it manually. It's always an option, but I'm not going to do that. So now that we added that package, I'm going to stop this. We may get the message there, might not. If we save, we will, I'm sure. I'll just save, Control S, and there we go. Looks like it's doing a Flutter pub get. If for any reason you don't get that Flutter pub get, it doesn't show that doesn't show up, you can just type it in manually. What that'll do is that'll set all the dependencies here correctly, and it'll get everything that it needs. I like to compare it to the npm install if you're working with a JavaScript environment and with the Node package manager. So now that that is set, it was that easy basically. It could have even been easier if we would have just done this, the Dart pub add or Flutter pub add DO. I just want that specific version though, so that's what we're gonna do it this way. Now that we have that added to the project though, we're gonna go back to our lib directory and we will create a new folder. So the first folder is gonna be models, and the second folder is going to be repositories. Not to be confused with GitHub repositories. So this is just going to be a repository of API calls, and I like to group them by the route prefix. So if we're going to have an authorization level like repository, then that's what we're going to, or if we're going to have a repository with authorization level API calls, then that's all it's going to contain. I don't like to mix and match because it can be a little I don't want to call it difficult to debug, but if somebody is coming into the project that hasn't worked in it before, they're probably going to expect just authorization level repositories if they see, or authorization level API calls if they see that. So it's just for code clarity. So I'm going to create a new file here, and while they are authorization level calls, I'll call them user because that's what we refer to. That's what we base all of the routes off of the user class or the user model or schema in the API that I wrote. So I'll just call it user client. And what we can do in user client is we're going to need to import a couple packages here. So first, we're going to need the do package. And we're going to get a little warning here that we haven't used it yet. That's fine. We can just keep it. Keep that right there. And as we start referring to different models, we're going to add them. At this point, we're not going to need any models. Later on in this lecture video, you will see that we're going to need some different models, basically for the authorization response, for the user or the login structure, I'll call it. So what we can start off with here is we're going to define a base URL, constant string base URL. And this is important if you, so you can do this, like what we have in Postman here. You can refer to this as localhost, but you're going to run into some problems if you try to make the API call. It'll probably give you a connection refused error, and you can look into it and you can run a command each time that you want to debug. It's like ADB reverse, it's something like that. If you look up the error message, that's the solution that'll probably come up. That will work if you want to use localhost, but the way around it is you just use your IP, your local IP. So what we can do here is we can just go to new terminal, and we can just run ipconfig. And if we look at my IPv4 address, we'll just take that and we'll set it here in this format. We'll define the route prefix, and there we go. Now that variable is defined. Now what we'll do is we'll create the class. So class user client. We're going to create an instance of the DO object. So we're going to say final DO. We're going to pass in base options, as we can see here from the little help text there. Set the base URL. That's created now. And now to actually create the client-side call. So it's really straightforward with GET requests. With POST requests, it can be a little bit more challenging, especially since Start doesn't have a super straightforward way of serializing and deserializing data. It's almost easier to do it manually rather than to serialize and deserialize and look up how to do that. And if you remember, serialization is where you'll take an object that you've defined. So if we have like a user model with a couple properties, serialization would be converting that into a string that we can pass via a wireless medium or a wired medium. And deserialization is taking that string and converting it into an instance of that object. So what we can do here though is we can just we're just going to be expecting a string. I'm not going to send the API call. I'm not going to send that request again via curl, because you saw that when we sent the API version request, we got a string response. So just like in plain English, we're going to send a request, not pass anything in, and we're going to expect a string response. So we're going to form it that way. So what we'll do first is we will say future. And if you look at the docs for future, kind of tells you what it does. It's the asynchronous result. So if you work with C#, you'll see task. Task is the C# equivalent. I believe future is used in Java. I haven't done any asynchronous Java programming, but I believe that's what it is. I could be wrong. Probably other programming languages, but in this one, this is what we'll use. We will use future. And then future, we're going to pass in the type that we're going, like what we're going to expect of, like what type of future, right? What task of type what, future of type what, we're going to expect a future of type string. So this essentially says, as with the result of that asynchronous action, we're going to expect a string at the end of it. So we're going to say that. We're going to define the method now. So we're just going to say get API version. And we're going to have that be an asynchronous request. for now we could just return. That would work fine. That's of course not what we're going to do in the end, but that's how we'll keep it for now. So again, look at the structure. It's just a regular method or function. We have the return type, which is a future of type string. We have the function or method name. We have the identifier to say whether or not it's asynchronous. Identifier is probably not the correct term, but we're saying that it's going to be asynchronous, and we're going to return some stuff. So what we'll do here is we're just going to create a variable response, and we're going to say await do.get. So if we look at do again, we have a couple options. Okay, so we can see the options that we have here: fetch, get URI, patch, post, put. We have a whole bunch of options here. In this case, we're just going to get, and we're just going to set the route that we want to get. So perfect. So notice we're forming the API call the way we would in curl. So we would say, or Postman, we would say, here's the base URL. I'll do it one more time. And then here's the other part of it, API version. By default, curl is going to expect a, whoops. It's going to send a GET request. We're going to paste that in though. So there we go. Send that request. And do I have a breakpoint? I need to make sure I don't have a breakpoint over there. Okay. Let me see what's going on here. I will be right back when I determine what's wrong there. It's just error code 1D10T. 1D10T. Idiot error. I needed to set the port. There we go. So there's our API version. That's all we're doing here though. We're just forming that. We're forming the URL, and we're going to send a GET request to it. Then of course we want to return that, so we're going to say return response, but that's not it. We can't just return a response. We need to return the response.data. Now response.data is dynamic, so this can be problematic. We know exactly what we're going to expect, but if for any reason we throw an exception, this will break. So of course we want error handling. The API version, I'm not going to do it. We will do it with the login because that's going to be a lot more important to have that error handling. And of course it's just a simple try catch that we can use there. So now that we have that set up, we need to be able to send that request from the client side or from the UI. So what I'm going to do right away is I'm going to, let me look at my recording here. Perfect. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bind this, quote unquote bind. I know that that's probably not the right term for Flutter, but we're going to assign the value that we're going to display inside of this text widget to a variable. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create a string API version. You just set that to an empty string. Set that there, and that's good to go so far. Now we can run and debug right now, but at this point we're not going to. We're going to add a little bit more logic here. So right away we want to define an instance of the what do you call it? Sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. Of the client, the user client. So what we can do here, gotta pull it up over here on this. Okay, perfect. See, the problem is that if you don't set it in the right class, it's not going to work right. So you just have to set it in the right class. So we have to go inside of this here, stateful widget. We're going to say final user client. We're going to create a new instance of user client. Whoops. It's not going to expect anything. If we look back to user client, We don't have a constructor yet, so it's not going to expect any parameters. We can do a quick fix here, and we need to add the import. Now we can do that via the quick fix, which I'll just demonstrate here for just to get this done a little quicker. Remember to use relative pathing. So repositories, user client, and you will see this error with constant. Just for debugging purposes, we can get rid of that for now. That'll work just fine. Once we have that user client defined, we need to hook onto the init state method. So in that init state method, that's kind of like your on appearing method in other programming languages and other frameworks. So right away when this appears, we want to go and fire off some logic. So what we can do is we can say void init state. Whoops. And inside of the init state method, we will do super.init state. So to call the original init state method that we're not overloading, and then just remember we need to define a boolean as loading, or just a boolean loading. Initialize that to false, and here we will set it to true. And in here we'll make the API call. So right away what we can do is we can say widget to access something that's outside of the scope of the class my homepage state. Widget dot user client dot get API version dot then, and in here we want to have an arrow function or an anonymous function. Response. And in here, what I like to do when I make API calls in Dart is I like to create another function just to handle what to do with the response, handle what to do with what comes back from the API call. So we can do void set API version. This is going to expect a string API version. We will set the state in there. I know I'm doing a bunch of stuff without starting the application yet, but it's not a big deal right now that we're debugging. So set the API version, and to update the API version, we want to set the state right away. Inside of the set state, we're just going to say API version is equal to version that we pass in. And inside of the then clause, we just need to invoke set API version and pass in response. So we can go ahead and start the program now and start debugging, kind of to go through what we're doing here. So I'll set a breakpoint right there, open up the debug console, and we're going to see what it does here. So we hit our breakpoint here, and it all seems accurate so far. We hit the init state method, the function init state function, just as we're going to start drawing the screen. Step over that. I'm going to make that API call, and I'll set a breakpoint in here, and I'll also set a breakpoint in the client. Demonstrate what we're doing in there. Continue. We are inside of the get API version, which we invoked here. Get API version. Kind of look at what it's doing there, though. Oops, jumping around all over the place here. Step over that. And we may have had an error there. Maybe, maybe not. So in here, not only can I do that, I can also say print the response. Save that, start the application all over again, and see what we get here. Didn't get anything back. I'm going to take a look at that, make sure everything looks good, and I'll be right back. I'm sure many of you saw it right away when I ran into that the first time with the terminal, but I gotta set the port here. Now we should be able to actually make the request, or send the request. Restart here. There we go. We got the API version back, and we set it here. Let's continue through that, and there we go. There's our API version. So why don't we add some loading stuff? So just a structure so that we can tell the user, hey, we are loading currently. What we can do to do that is we can go in the column here, and we can say, let's see here, create a new column. And inside of this column, we will just set a circular progress indicator and a text widget. We can set a ternary. We can use our ternary operator here to our advantage, and we can say once we set our API version, stop loading. Save that. But then we want to do something after we stop loading. So first off, we got to hook into that this variable here using the ternary operator. So we can say here loading. If we're loading, then do this. Else, whoops. Else we can just display what we were displaying before. Let's hot restart there. Get out of there. And it was pretty quick. You might have noticed, you might not have noticed. So I'll just set a breakpoint in here so that I can kind of demonstrate what we're doing. I'll set a breakpoint in here. That way when we hit this block of code, we're not going to return something right away. We're just going to be quote unquote doing some stuff in the server, and the client is awaiting. It's just waiting right there. So restart that. We're going to send that API call right away as we draw the screen. We are in the server now. We got some stuff. Well, we didn't get anything in, but we're in the server right now. We got the request. We are processing the request stuff. So we're telling the user, hey, just wait. Basically, we're loading. The second we continue out of this, we will stop loading, and we'll process the data that comes back and display it on the screen. Pretty straightforward. So that was at its core, that's all we're doing. We're just sending the API call from the client side at some point based off of some event. In this case, we're hooking onto the init state event, and yeah, that's about all it is. Now it's going to get a little bit more complicated now that we start to work with other data, because not only are we going to be working with GET requests, we also have to work with POST requests. So to start off now, we need to define some models. So in here, we're going to create the user model. Well, it's not going to be the user model. We're not going to be doing any user operations quite yet. I have the model here on another screen. I'm just pulling it up so that you all don't have to sit there and watch me go through Postman and determine what's what. So right away we're going to, well, actually, you know what, I might as well do it just so that you all can get an idea of what I'm doing here. The login request is going to expect a username and a password. So I'm going to create a model for that for that login request that's expecting, just to formalize it a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a login structure. This is for the login request again. And it's pretty boring, pretty tedious. All we're doing is we're just creating the model. So class login structure. We're going to set some properties here. Set the constructor here. Whoops. So that's created now. And we might need to refer to another. Yeah, we're going to need the response as well. So if we look at the response has, so this, it can get a little bit tricky here depending on the API that you're working with. This is good though, because that way you'll be exposed to the possibilities here. So in this case, you're not going to be accessing just properties that come back. In this case, you're going to be accessing, well, that was not accurate, right? So you're always going to be accessing stuff that comes back, but in this case, it's not just direct properties. So it's not just key value pair, key string, and then a string value that you're going to read and use. In this case, we're going to have a string key, a string value, just true, string key, object value. So we need to work with this object value. This is the actual response payload that we really care about. This is the block of the response payload that we care about, the user ID and the token, because this is what we're going to be using to make API calls later on in the application. So we need to represent this specifically, right? We can strip all of this other stuff off without having to create a model for it. We could create a model for it if we wanted to. In this case, we're not going to, because we don't need the success equals true. Why? Because it's kind of redundant. If you think about it, we send the API call, or we send the request, and if it fails, it's going to return a 401, just a 401 unauthorized. So that's not going to return anything. It's not going to return any of this stuff, at least the way it's set up currently. And if the request goes through properly, if we send in the right stuff and the user's authorized, well, then it's redundant, because we never set success to false essentially. So the way that it's set up, this is redundant, so we're not going to need to work with that. So we have the user ID and the token. So I'm going to create the class to handle that response. So name it appropriately, auth response. Could also name it login response. I'm just going to use auth response though. Let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, perfect. It's probably going to be a long one again, like I said. We're going to expect back a user ID and a token. That's what we're going to be using. If we go back to our client, we're going to be posting some stuff. So it's going to get a little tricky, right? Especially if you're working from scratch. If you haven't worked with that API before, if you are unfamiliar with the so if you're unfamiliar with the response, you're just, it's a losing battle. You're not going to win. You need to know what's coming back. But just to kind of work with all of it, that's where it can get a little bit tricky. You have to use some tricks to parse the data, to work with it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a future of type auth response. Now, very important, it's going to be a nullable auth response, because sometimes it's either the response is going to be good or it's not going to be good. Either the user was logged in or they weren't logged in. An error occurred during the request, or the request came back perfectly. So we need to handle that, and the way that I am choosing to handle it is just to return null to the UI. There are other ways of handling this. Of course, you could create a response. So this auth response, we could have an additional property is successful, and then if we throw an exception in here, if we throw an error, we can just say, okay, we'll create a new instance of auth response, but we're just going to set the success to false, and then we can still use auth response in the client side. That's one thing that you could do. I'm not going to do that, just to kind of keep it shorter here. So I'm just going to call this login. Maybe a better term would be try login or try login async, but I'll just have it be login for now, just to stay very descriptive. We're going to pass in a login structure. I'm going to call that user. We need to import that, so I'll just hover over import the relative library, and we can go ahead. Oh, and it needs to be asynchronous. That's right. So what we're going to do here is we definitely want to try catch in here, because this will break at some point. This will break. The user at some point will pass in a bad password, a bad username, junk data. So to do that, just try catch. Try some stuff. Catch an error. And we could just print the error. Honestly, that's probably going to be our best bet. We do want to do something if that comes back. If we throw an error, though, we want to return null, like I said earlier. Might seem obvious, but if we remove that null, if we remove that nullable, if we make this not nullable, then of course this is going to be problematic. So just to kind of solidify that point. And the try, we will create a variable response just like we did over here. Almost started writing that out. And similarly, we're going to say do dot, not get, it's going to be post, but similar syntax. And we're going to post to the login route. The case doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter at all, actually. So just so you're aware. Now here is where it'll be kind of tricky. This is where the serialization and the deserialization would be great, because typically what we could do is we could just go and say, hey, post the user to this here route. But we're not going to do that just because serialization and deserialization is just so tedious in Dart. So what we can do is we're just going to say we're going to pass in some data. So before I do that, though, let me kind of show you what we're doing. We're just mimicking all of this to this client side. So notice the data raw. That's all we're passing in. We're just passing in raw request body data. So exactly the way that you see it, that's what we're going to be passing in. That's what we're going to be. Otherwise, we're going to throw an error. So for that, we're going to have to form the JSON. So username. It's going to be user.username, and password is going to be user.password. Pretty straightforward. So again, like I said, it gets a little bit trickier. We have this response, but we need to use the response data. That's essentially the object that comes back. So what we can do is we can say data, so variable data is equal to response dot data. Whoops. There we go. And what I should do is I should debug here, kind of just to go through the whole process for when you inadvertently create your own application and work with your own API. So what we can do here is we can go back to the main.dart, and we can start adding some stuff here. So let's get rid of some of this here stuff. Let's see here, there we go. I'll just set this off to the side. If you want to know, by the way, the keyboard command for commenting, you can do a block, or you can do a block comment. This, or not a block comment, but you can comment multiple lines by hitting Control. As you're holding Control, do a KC. So letter K, and then let off, and then letter C. I'm going to Control Z again. Control. I'm going to tap the letter K key and then the letter C key. So now that we have that covered, though, little tip there, we're going to start setting up the UI here. So to start off, we are going to expect a username and a password. So how do we present the data? How do we present this to a user in a clean way? We can just use a combination of rows and columns. So to start off, we're going to have our column here. Instead of saying main axis alignment dot center, we're going to say main axis alignment dot space between. If you look at the docs here, it'll tell you what that does. Maybe, let's see here. Okay, it's good. It's showing me the error as well, but just places free, space evenly between the children. That's exactly what we want. So we set that. Inside of that column, we're going to want another column. And we're going to set the main axis alignment in there to space around. If we look at that, I guess this one doesn't even, oh, there we go. Places the free space, blah, 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 blah. You guys get it. So just read the docs. Save that for formatting. Add our trailing comma. We need to set the children inside of that. Right away, we're going to create a text widget. Inside of this text widget, we're going to say enter the credentials, or just enter credentials. That looks good so far. Could work on formatting later. For now, let's just kind of get the bulk of the UI done. Now that that's done, though, this quote-unquote container column is going to contain all this other stuff. We're going to throw some other stuff in there. So we're also going to want a row. And let's set the main axis alignment to center. Then the children to the first text field. So let's kind of go through what I'm doing here. Right away, I am displaying the text, enter credentials, and then we want the row to contain the first input, right? The first text field. So in order to do this, it's you may run into a problem, and I fixed it here, of course, so that you don't have to see that problem, but I'll demonstrate it anyways in case you do run into it in the future. So right away, what you may be tempted to say, oh, let's just throw in the text field, and what you can do that just fine. Just say text field, and we can just set our decoration here. Set the hint text to username. Let's see what happens here. Okay, let's do a hot restart. There we go. So you may run into this here exception, the needs paint exceptions or error. So this kind of goes back to reading your stack traces. Make sure you read them thoroughly. Not the entire thing, of course, right? Like this is all logic that you don't really you have access to it. You could get down and dirty into that, but it doesn't matter because you're not going to make a change to Flutter src rendering box.dart. That's not. It's not because it's broken. It's because the problem isn't the library. The problem is your code. You wrote junk code and now it's breaking. So this is telling you where it's breaking. But what you want to do typically is you want to look at the top and you want to look at the bottom. Just as a general rule of thumb, kind of give you an idea of how things are set up here. So it points at text field finally. It might give you an idea of what is going wrong there. But for now, that's not it's not giving us enough information. So let's look here. Okay, an input decorator, blah blah blah, created by a text field cannot have unbounded width. So that's it. That's the problem. There's a problem with how, like the space assignment, the pixel assignment for that username, or not for the username, but for the username text field. So what we can do to get around this, though, is we can put this in an expanded widget. We'll look at the documentation to kind of see what it does. Look at where I am on time. Okay. I apologize if that's annoying, but I don't want to go way over the limit. Spend 2-3 hours on this stuff. So I'll create that expanded widget. Look at what it does here. It says right there, creates a widget that expands a child of a row. Okay, that's exactly what we need here. We need to expand the child of a row. so that the child fills the available space. That sounds about right. That's exactly what we need, actually. So that's where we're going to use it. Takes in a child. That child will be the text field. And if we save this and restart, we should see our cool text field here. And maybe not. You're probably laughing right now. Okay, there we go. Excellent. So here we go. Kind of got ahead of myself there. Excellent. So there's our username. Throw stuff in there for now, but of course this can't do anything because we don't have a text editing controller yet. So we need to define that. Before we define that, let's finish up the rest of the UI. So let's create the password. So at the end of this row, we're going to want to create another row. It's going to have, oh, whoops, getting ahead of myself there. Don't want to set the main axis alignment in this one. Children, it'll just be like this one here as well. Just copy that. Let that auto format. Say that this is the password. Perfect. Next, we will want, let's see here, add a comma there, another row. In this case, we're not going to need the expanded, just because it's just going to be a button. Going to be an elevated button. On pressed of null, we're just building the UI for now, so it doesn't really matter. And a child of login, just to kind of indicate to the user that they can click the button to log in. Add our trailing commas there, and that looks pretty good so far. So next, go back to my reference over here. We need to add the as loaded stuff. So just got to make sure that we are in the right spot. Okay, this should be it. Whoops, actually no, it's not. It's this one. Yep. Or maybe not. There we go. That should be it. So for loading, we're going to create a column. We're going to display a column. So it's just going to be this here stuff. Okay, getting a bunch of errors here, so I'll just pause and then clean it up so you don't have to watch me do that. Okay, it was a two-part problem. So the first part is that it wasn't in the right spot, so I'm just gonna get rid of this. It's already copied to my clipboard. Move down and display it right there. There we go. Now it looks like we have a very slight problem here. We're displaying this this API version right in the center when we should be displaying it all the way to the end. So I'm going to determine what's causing that just so we can have a clean UI right away. Okay, we just need to align this here all the way at the end just by using the row, or using a row. So we're just going to say row, set our main axis alignment, set that to end, so that displays at the end. Set the children to what we were displaying before, and there we go. Next, we probably are going to want to do that with the button. So in here, we're going to set the main axis alignment to main axis alignment.center. There we go. Kind of cleans it up a little bit. We could throw some padding in here, but for now that's not too important. This kind of gets it clean enough for us to use. So, of course, this is attached to this button currently is attached to a to no method. So we need to create the method or the function to fire off that API call. So what I can do here is I'm just going to create a function on login button press. Take that and paste it down to the button. So that's attached now. Now if we hit that login button, we will fire off the logic and the on login button press. Right away we want to set the state. And in the set state we want to set loading to true. So what are we going to do here? We want to take the stuff that's in here and make the API call with that. And actually, before I get too far ahead of myself, I'm just going to create the two controllers for each one of these. So I'm going to say var username controller. Do the same thing for password. And then associate those with these text fields. Whoops. Probably wants a constant here. Not going to worry about that for now though. Not super important. So we need to use this here stuff. So if I go and I say print username controller.text, and then I set a breakpoint in here, I should be able to hit that button and see that nothing was entered into that text box or into that text field. Enter that text in there. We will see that that's what we have in there. Very important to do, just step by step, make sure that you are covering all of your bases. So if you write a bunch of logic and you're like, oh, it's not making the API call, well, you have a couple different layers that you have to explore. So first the layer where the user inputs the data, then the layer where you start performing some logic or manipulation to that data, and then of course you can get to the API layer if you want to call it that. Make sure you're getting there, make sure the data is making it all the way there. Multitude of problems that could go wrong, but kind of like a watch, we got to make sure that all of them are working correctly, otherwise it's not going to work properly. So it's fine, don't want to print that anymore. We can add some input validation. I'm not going to because we've covered that before. The input validation that I would recommend adding here if you are working on something that will be going into production is of course making sure that there are values in there and notifying the user that, hey, you didn't pass anything in, you gotta add something in there. You would be surprised as to the stuff that users do. Or something you would never expect them to do, like hitting login without entering something. You know, even accidentally, those are things that happen. So here we want to set loading to true. So right away when they hit that login button press, we want to tell them, hey, we're sending the API call essentially. We want to create an instance of login structure. Now you have two options here. You could say, let me import that as well. You could say login structure user is equal to new login structure, or you can just say var. Either works. I think I've used both of them so far. And this login structure is going to expect a couple things. It says it's unnecessary new. I'm just using new just to create a new instance in C#. So in this case, we will say username controller. Whoops. So that's what we're going to set as our username, and then as our password, just the password controller.text. So we now have an instance of user that we're going to pass in. And now we got to make the API call. And then this login is going to expect a login structure user. After that, we want to take that response and do some stuff with it. We're going to create a function on login. Maybe that's not the best name. Let's see here. On login call completed. That's probably a better one. We're not going to return anything. And we're going to expect in a variable response. Right away, we want to call that function. Pass the response. Looks perfect. Print the response. Let's see what we do here now. So right away, we're going to want to set a breakpoint right here just to see what we're getting back. We're going to set one here as well in case we throw an error. And we threw an error. If we look at the error text, 401 unauthorized, just as I'd expect. So let's kind of go through what it's doing on the server side as well. We're going to show the loading deal there just because we never set loading to false. Let's kind of go through what's going on though. There we go. Let's try setting that request again. Jump through this logic, see what's going on here. Username and password are empty, as you can see there. We check to see if the user exists. There is no user, so it's null. Due to that, we're going to return a 401 and just a text message saying verify credentials. Exactly what we expect to see. So let's handle that. Why don't we handle that and let the user know that something happened, something unexpected happened. So first off, the first thing we want to do is we want to, let's see here, we want to get rid of that loading thing there, so we can just do a set state. If you try doing this without a set state, which we can just go ahead and do that actually, you might think that because it's already in a set state, it's going to update the state, it's going to update that variable on screen, but not always the case. Let's just demonstrate that though. So let's pass in some junk credentials. And yeah, even though we set it to false here, we're not seeing the updated value. So what we can do here is we can say set state, set loading to false. Let's try that. Excellent. So we saw the API call right away there. And we are seeing our API version there too. And this is moving up and down as we would expect it to as well. So that's perfect. So not only do we want to do that though, we also want to let the user know what's going on. So for that, I'm just going to use a scaffold, a snack bar. So before we even show the snack bar though, we have a couple scenarios here of what response could be equal to. So if we send this junk request response. See what response is. It's null. It's null. It's empty. It doesn't have a value because that's exactly what we said to do over here. Jump through that logic again. Try to send the request. We throw an exception because it's, we pass in junk, and we return null. Perfect. And if we look here again, junk. So we got to handle that now. We can now. This is going to be a little bit tricky, but it's going to be super useful for working with HTTP requests and responses essentially. So we can do right away. This is easy. We can say if the response is null, which we set it to null if there's a problem. Then we can say show the snack bar, which we can do just by doing scaffold manager or scaffold messenger, I mean. Show snack bar. Create a new snack bar here. Set the content to text widget saying login failure. So that's good. So far that's good. And if we try this, perfect. We see that there's a login failure. Not going to set the snack bar duration because it's fine as is. Gets the point across. What we want to do though now is we want to handle a good response. So why don't we try that? We try sending in admin and Dogecoin. Send that request. We still threw an exception though. That's not good. Oh, of course. So we need to process that data. We sent that request. We read our response, and then the response.data. Ooh, okay. I forgot to mention that that was a slight problem with the debugger when working with this. When working with asynchronous calls like this. So we have to go back to the old-fashioned crappy debugging, I like to call it, because we're going to be printing this stuff. So we're just going to do a Flutter run here. Just to kind of get around that. Just go ahead and do that. Print the data, then we're going to see what we have to do with this data. Perfect. Launch the application. And we are getting up there on time. We're getting close to being done though. So we got our API version, printed it to the console here. And let's pass in some good stuff here, a good payload. So admin, Dogecoin, just Dogecoin, login failure, and here we go. This is the data. This is exactly. Oh, whoops! I hit the letter F while. That was my mistake. Sorry about that. Hit that again. Get the data again. So this is what we would expect. This is the data that we would get back from that call. Success true, data, and then an object. Success true, the data, and the object. So now we got to parse that. We want this. This is what we need in here. That we need the contents of data. So the way that we can access that is the exact same way that we would access an element from a map, because that's all that it is. It's just a map. And it says that it's a dynamic, but we can work with it as if it were a map, and that will work just fine. And since we're in a try-catch, there's no repercussions. We handle that. It's the power of the try-catch. So what we can do here now is we can get rid of this data. We know what we want now. We want the contents of that response data. So now I'm going to create another variable, auth response. Looks about right. New instance of auth response. That's going to expect a user ID and a token. Remember, we need to return an auth response to the to the UI. That's what it expects. So how do we extract user ID and token though? We need to say data position user ID. As you can see right there, data position user ID. And data position token. Should be good so far. We can go ahead and test it though. Oh, and then we need to return it, of course. Set a breakpoint in there. And looks like there was a problem. Oh, that's right. We are still in the... We're still in the old-fashioned mode here. I'm going to do a hot restart. I was used to saving the file, then having it automatically restart with the debugger. Try sending that request, and looks like there's a problem. We print that error though. Okay. I want to try debugging to see if we can determine what's going on now. I just realized actually I don't even need to do that. So we're setting data to response.data, but again, if you remember, response.data is equal to, where is it? Response.data is equal to all of this. So we need to access the data element of response.data. Sounds kind of complicated, but all we have to do is access, just like I said, it's a map, so we just access the data element. There we go. That should work fine. We can print it as well. So let's pass in some good stuff here. Admin, some good credentials. Dogecoin. And we need to remember what we do here. Look back at the main.dart. We don't do anything. Okay, perfect. So that's accurate so far. We don't do anything there. So now that we aren't doing any more asynchronous DO debugging, we can just go back to the normal debugging screen here. The normal debugging configuration. Let that launch. Excellent. So let's take a look at what response comes back as. Look at the response, and that looks great, right? We have a token, and we have the user ID. So this all looks good so far. So in theory, all we should have to do is say else display. We just want to display the token, just for the purpose of this application. We're just going to want to display the token. We will later use the token and store it in local secure storage to make API calls to this API. But as of right now, we just wanted to display it to the user just to kind of prove that, hey, login came back good, and more importantly for us as developers, we want to see it here. So in theory, all we should have to do is just say scaffold manager. We should just be able to copy paste this down here, and we should just be able to say token. Response.token, right? Let's try that out. See how well that works for us. let that hot restart finish there. Okay, it's taking its time, so I'm just going to completely stop debugging. Start over again. And okay, in this case it worked, but let's try to access it. Okay, so I guess I must have added a little bit of redundant code then, because we can access the token of response. The formal way to do it, though, of course, is we need to make sure that since we pass in a variable response, I guess the problem here is that how do we know that token exists in response? And the way that you would do that typically is you would say if the variable you're referencing is of the type, so auth response, then you access it. But I guess in this case we don't need to do that. But it is good to have, right? So this essentially tells any developer looking at that we're making sure we're just determining here that it is of this type response, and if for any reason it's not that response, then we're not going to run this logic here, this here condition. Save that, and there we go. So just make sure I've covered everything that I need to cover here. We have that initial API call. So again, let's kind of go through all of the stuff that we've covered here so far. It's been quite a bit, so let's kind of go through all of it. We wanted to make an API call to this API here. So we wanted to make an API call to this API, and we could have done it through Postman, but of course this is not user friendly. This isn't what the users would use to make their payments and to do all their user stuff. So we want to do all of that through a mobile application. So to start off, we want to set up the package to make the API call. So the DO package here. Once we did that, we created our repository of API calls, which in this case it was the user client, and it refers, I shouldn't say refers, it makes calls to this here route prefix, the auth, which we set inside of the API, and we covered the future. So this is the asynchronous structure for Dart, and then we covered what we could pass in essentially what we want to return in the future. It's kind of bad wording, but of what type that asynchronous response is going to be. Of course, more asynchronous interaction here. Posts and get requests. We haven't covered query string parameters yet. It's just as straightforward as the post request is, though. And of course, the documentation lays it out pretty easily. We will cover it eventually, though. Covered exception handling and parsing the data. So once we have all the once we have the API call repository ready to go to make the API calls, went to the client side, set up a way to get the user input, which in this case was a text field for the username and then a text field for the password. After that, we wanted to set a button, of course, for them to log in. And while the API call is being made, we want to let the user know that we're making the API call. The system is waiting on that response. In addition to that, we displayed the API version, which is made which is fetched via an API call to the API. And we covered the init state method. So overloading the init state method, or not overloading, but overriding the init state method, and adding some logic right away after the page is drawn, or as the page is being drawn. So that's about it. Covered quite a bit of stuff here, but this is the fundamentals for working with APIs in a Dart application. So later on, we're going to be adding some more functionality, like first the login. We have the login part down. Then we have to get new screens where the user can do other stuff. So like the user, once they're logged in, the user's probably going to want to get the list of customers and do stuff with those customers, probably create, read, update, and delete actions. They all are going to correspond to these here requests that I have set up. And at an even lower level, it's going to correspond with the routes that we have set up here in Node.js, this Express API. And at an even lower level, it's corresponding with the data types that we have, or not the data types, but with the models that we have created and stored in MongoDB. So this is kind of the start to finish. Start off with the data, then we go to the data processing inside of the API, so the customer routes here, or the auth routes, for example. And then we do stuff with that data, we process it based on what happens here, which is, remember that this is quote-unquote event-driven. This only happens when it gets that request. Once we do that, we take the resource that the client wants to access, assuming that they're authorized, and we let them use it. Once we have that resource that we want to access, that we set the request for, we display it to the client. We display it to the user on the client side. So kind of convoluted, but using this, following this paradigm, following this structure, it allows for, it's going to sound silly, but it allows for ease of debugging, because now you have compartmentalized each block of code. So instead of having all of the logic in one file or in one project, now you have multiple projects, and you can delegate responsibilities now. So yeah, you can have one user creating the API and working on the API, or not user, I'm sorry. You can have one developer working on the API, another one working on the client side, another one working on the database, or if you're a rock star, you can do it all yourself. And the other thing too is security, of course. So we don't want direct database access from the client side. It's a pretty big thing. Other than that, though, we're going to keep progressing. We're going to keep adding functionality. So keep your eye out for that. And I hope that this has gotten you excited so far, because this is the peak essentially of everything that we've done so far. It's kind of putting it all together. So I hope you see the power of it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.